Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar comic review. This is going to be my full spoiler review for The Bounty Hunter and the Brewer, the most recently released Avatar one-shot comic, this one being about June and Iroh, of course. I did put out a non-spoiler review out a few days ago if you want to check that out, but we're here to talk about the full details here. And just know that I will be doing a spoiler live stream covering this book, not this weekend, but next weekend. This weekend is going to be the spoiler live stream for the Reckoning of Roku novel. But let's jump in. So yeah, you guys know I like the book, like I said in my non-spoiler review. I definitely think it's among the better one-shots along the lines of, Suki Alone and Azula in the Spirit Temple. They're all very different styles of story. This one in some ways is among the more interesting ones because it's two characters in focus where you get a chance to really explore a more minor character like June at the same time as we get a little bit of interesting stuff with one of our main interesting characters in Iroh, of course. I don't think the book is perfect. It's hard to, I think, overly rave about the strength of these one-shots when they are just slightly longer short stories than you would maybe expect. It's still very good, but as I said before, it should be among, I think, a couple of comic releases in a year. A book like this should not be the only Avatar comic we get in a year. Other than that, the only main criticism I would probably have about the book is just that I think June's backstory probably could have been expanded or cover a different period of her backstory to get across a better idea, to link it better in with what the present day story is. What is present feels a little random, as we will get to. So I'm mostly going to do this spoiler review going through the book sort of roughly page by page. I'm going to go pretty quickly through the stuff where there's maybe not as much to say to focus in on the kind of key scenes. So the setup for the book is, of course, it's Iroh in the Jasmine Dragon. It's doing well. It's becoming a part of the community. And the initial scene here is basically that his customers love him, they love the tea, they love the Jasmine Dragon. There's a protester, a single protester outside who begins to bring up Iroh's past, the idea that he is the Dragon of the West. He, in the past, laid siege to this very city, Ba Sing Se. Why aren't we talking about this anymore, basically? Why is this your home? You shouldn't be here, basically get out. But just when Iroh maybe thinks things are about to go very, very wrong, maybe his past is going to get in the way of things, his patrons defend him. They step up to defend him. They tell the protester that he's the one causing the issues. The war is over. Kind of move on. Everyone else he's an important part of the city now. It's the best tea in the world. You get out of the way. You're the one causing issues. So it's like, oh great, like Iroh's new life that he has forged for himself is going well. But in the background, we have June kind of scoping out the place. And so she strikes that night when the shop closes, with the final key detail from the opening scene being that apparently the tea supply is beginning to dry up. They haven't been getting as many deliveries, and other tea shops are having the same problems. And this will come into play because a tea cartel is kind of a big factor in why everything happens here. So we do get June attacking Iroh to kind of claim him as her bounty. Iroh defends himself with some firebending, and she's able to get the advantage on him when he pulls her in by her whip, and she uses this as an opportunity to get in really close and blow basically powdered Shirshu venom into his face, knocking him out, of course. So she claims Iroh as her bounty here, and they're on their way. The initial kind of stuff here is just Iroh doing his typical thing when he gets captured. This is very much like when he was captured by the Earthbenders. He starts like singing and stuff. He starts annoying them to get kind of what he wants, which is, please answer one of my questions. Interesting detail, he does sing like a song about a water tribe girl, which is kind of a funny little detail. But yeah, the question he asks is, where are we going? So the details we get here is that we are going to Daxia Harbor. This is a Daxia. and it's a harbor. It's a former Fire Nation colony in the Huzin province, and it is apparently one of the last places a bounty hunter can make a decent living. It's noted for having a black market, and it's where most of the rare tea is sold in the world, and we'll get more information on it going forward here. So cool details there. It's a former Fire Nation colony. Huzin province has been mentioned before. It's referenced, I think, in one of the Yang Chen books, but most notably, I think during Azulon's funeral, they note that one of his main triumphs is with the Huzin province, of course. So cool that we have kind of one of the few remaining holdouts as a bit of a place for criminals to gather in the world is Daxia Harbor. So Iroh notes that, oh, I guess my past is beginning to catch up with me here. That's a big theme of this book. It's, can you actually move on from your past and create a new life for yourself? Can you atone for crimes you've perhaps done in the past? Iroh has already kind of, for the most part, made this transition, but he's now having to face his past once again in a different way. And the idea is that June is also having to face this as well, because this era is making it very difficult to be a bounty hunter. So she is going to have to, at some point, make a decision about her future and what does she actually do. We get an interesting scene here right at the start, which is that because it's really their first time properly talking here, Iroh decides that now is the time to apologize for how he kind of behaved around her the first time they met, which was during the events of Bado of the Water Tribe, that episode back in book 1, which is an interesting one that they decided to reference this. I think they could have made the decision to just kind of not reference it and just kind of go ahead, but they obviously felt like this is one of the few things that I would say Avatar is criticized for as kind of maybe not aging super well in the kind of 20 years basically since this episode, is the whole Iroh kind of has a crush on June, and the whole when she gets knocked out, he obviously saves her from falling down, but then he just kind of like waits there on the ground, kind of like sleeping next to her, and it's kind of like, okay, this is a little weird, but okay, it's just a very quick moment, we'll move on from it. They obviously felt that they had to address this because I guess it's come up enough, especially in maybe recent years. And I would say the second you announce a book like this, with these two characters, you kind of have to address what the characters' histories is, and that is basically the last time they met each other. So he says, June, when my nephew first hired you to hunt the Avatar, I did not treat you with the respect you deserved. I'm sorry for how I acted towards you. You owe me nothing, but I hope you will accept my apology. And she says, I'll think about it. She doesn't really look at him when she says this, like her hair kind of covers her eyes so you don't see this. So it's not made super clear like what June's thoughts are on like her last encounter with Iroh. At the very least, what this serves is as a way to start the idea of June doesn't really have to keep her guard up around Iroh, because Iroh is a very kind of respectful, just casual character that she can just be rather open around. That sure, he's her bounty, but he's probably the safest bounty that you could transport anywhere to a certain degree. As powerful as he is, she doesn't have to be super on guard necessarily around him, and the fact that he's in the bad position, she should kind of almost apologize to him for capturing him. He decides to apologize for a potentially like smallish moment when they met like a while back. So it speaks to, I suppose, him creating a better first impression this time round. So it'll be interesting to see what the fandom kind of has to say about this. I appreciate they at least say it, kind of move on from it relatively quickly, but it also serves as the proper reintroduction of the characters, and I think you kind of had to address it. First big action scene here is that they are attacked by the Viper Bats, which is a former bounty hunter group, and the idea is that they have made up for the fact that you can't really get too many bounties anymore in this era by they hunt fellow bounty hunters to turn them into the Earth Kingdom to make money, because that's something that's happening these days. That's how they make their livings. And so June views them as being traitors. She has a loyalty to fellow bounty hunters, especially the ones she's friends with, and so she really thinks that these guys are sort of the lowest of the low for doing this. We do get a fight scene here where she faces them on her own. She does pretty well, but she is outnumbered like 4-1 here. So Nyla and Iroh get a little bit involved here to scare the rest of them off. Nyla just kind of bumps one of them out of the way, and then Iroh does his breath of fire, which is very powerful here, even though he has his like hands behind his back. And they're just like, oh, we don't want to mess with that, because if Iroh was to join this fight full power, it's like, yeah, they don't stand a chance. So it's like, yeah, the money is not worth it here, basically. So that's the idea. And this kind of creates the real trust between the two of them of like, oh, I guess I don't need to kind of keep you, shackled anymore, basically. She does explain at this point she was hired by the leader of the Wu Yi tea cartel, which operates out of Daxia Harbor. So Iroh decides that, oh, well, I guess I want to go there anyway. One, to know who actually put the bounty out on me. Two, to find out why the tea supply is in such a kind of bad state. I want to like figure out what's going on here. It's just the idea that he is a captured bounty here, but he's just like, oh yeah, I'm going to go along with you. I want to figure out this anyway. He's just so casual about it and so confident, which is a fun part of the character, of course. They do talk about the idea of like, is it really that hard to be a bounty hunter these days? And the idea is that, yes, it is. Work has dried up almost exclusively. There are not many places you can get bounties. It's pretty much down to almost Daxia Harbor on its own. And Iroh notes that like Earth King Kuei has established reforms in the Earth Kingdom, and it is affecting lines of work like this. That the world is a lot more civilized now, and people are less likely to put bounties on people in this era, basically. So that's why things are such a struggle. And especially when June is not willing to lower herself to the point of selling out fellow bounty hunters. She refuses to do that. It goes against her own principles and the principles of her father, like what they stand for as, I suppose, more honorable bounty hunters to a certain degree. There's definitely a bit of a Dao Fei kind of feel to kind of what's going on here. Not that they quite, explain that whole idea overall. But yeah, Iroh asks, would you ever consider retirement from bounty hunting? But she says that staying put in a town, that's not her, basically. Because what she knows, the life that she likes, is traveling, because that's what she did, hunting bounties, growing up with her father all around the world. And Iroh's like, oh, you must have had a really exciting childhood. And so this is where we get the bit of June backstory that we've kind of been waiting for here. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to put this up on screen here. This is the old Nickelodeon website bio for the character. Now, we had this prior to the book. This is from like 2005, 6 or 7 or something like that. So we've had this information for quite a while, but not many people know about it because, one, the only way to access this is by an archived like version of it on Tumblr and references to it that are on like Avatar Wiki, basically. You can't just go to like the official Nickelodeon website and find this. So it's of the more obscure info that we have. Really hardcore fans know about it, but a lot of people don't. But very clearly, the backstory that they go into here is clearly based around the information established here. But it's interesting what they show and what they don't show. So, of course, the idea here is, okay, beautiful yet tough bounty hunter. She's the best and most expensive. Originally from the Earth Kingdom, she spent her childhood traveling with her father, who was also a bounty hunter. So they reference that right on this page just before the backstory starts. So that's cool. This is where she learned the tracking and fighting skills she uses today. Okay, makes sense, is kind of implied by that. June will track anyone so long as the price is right. She has no allegiance to any nation, only money. We'll get this at the end of the backstory, as we'll see. She uses a rare animal to hunt her fugitives, a Shirshu. Her father gave her the Shirshu when she was just a kid, and the two grew up together. When June is not out searching for fugitives, she can most likely be found at a local tavern, arm wrestling or gambling with some ruffians. So that's all fine. So you'll note there they give us a basic backstory of where Nyla kind of came from. Her father gave Nyla to her, and they've been around each other for quite a while. If you look up the Nyla/Shearshoe article on the old Nickelodeon website, it says that Nyla and June have been with each other for like 17 years. So it gives you a sense for like how old June is kind of meant to be. So it's kind of like, I guess, mid to late 20s, depending on what exact time during her childhood she was given Nyla. But that is the kind of rough idea here. So I'll keep this up on screen as we go through the backstory that's actually in the comic. So we jump in with a younger June talking to her mother and her father. They're having a meal together. She asks them to tell her her favorite story, which is the story basically of how her parents met and fell in love, and you know what their roles were at the time, basically. So straight away we get the idea that, okay, her mother is a thief. Her father, initially in the story, is a soldier as part of the Earth Kingdom. So straight away, you're looking for the transition of like, when does her father become a bounty hunter? And in a way, what happens to the mother? So the mother as a thief, they describe here, is someone who steals from rich Earth Kingdom nobles and gives to the poor. So kind of Robin Hood style thing. That's what's going on here. And she just wants to make things a little bit more equal in the Earth Kingdom. And the Earth Kingdom nobles don't like her as a thief and what they do, taking their stuff. So they sent an elite force of soldiers after her. And June's father is basically part of this elite force. They set a trap for June's mother, which, bit of a frustration point here. Why on earth don't they name her parents here? Given that you have literal pages of content that involve the characters like speaking on screen, it's really silly to me that you have this opportunity but just did not decide to name her parents in the, like, this is going to be like the one time we get a significant June like involvement in a comic. Why don't you name them here? Maybe there's a hope for like library edition collection of the second group of 3 comics down the line. That might tell us something, but in the comic itself, they don't say who the characters are. So unfortunately, I'm talking about June's mother and June's father with June. A lot of references like that here. The trap is interesting that they set for her. It's like a golden kind of smallish statue of a lion turtle on a table. And they obviously ambush her at this point. And her mother thinks that her life is over. But it was actually just the beginning in some ways, because one person recognized the injustice the beautiful thief fought against and decided he could not stand for it. Neither of them expected to fall in love, a thief and a soldier. Who could imagine such nonsense? But it happened. And it is June's favorite story of how her parents met. And they say, it's time for bed, June. But this is when the soldiers arrive looking for her parents. Because, of course, now we're in a situation where she's still a wanted thief, but now a wanted thief who has escaped with the help of a soldier who has now basically deserted the military, basically betrayed people. So this obviously is where he kind of, I guess, takes up bounty hunting after this. So the situation we get here is that both parents are hunted here. They brought the whole army, it seems like. June's mother decides that the father is going to have to take June and make an escape attempt here. She is going to sacrifice herself, distract them, but she's probably going to get caught, with the logic being that I'm just a thief. The treatment that I get will not be as bad as it would be if you were to get captured, because you are basically a deserter of the army. You betrayed them. You're going to get much worse treatment. So June's mother makes the sacrifice here. And the final words here are, go. Make sure June grows up free. And we just get some visuals here of June's father with June running along the rooftops, basically to start a new life, effectively as bounty hunters, to tie into the backstory we were just told, obviously. We come out of the backstory and we just get June telling us some stuff here about this as well. My father had principles. We swore to never do a job for any government authority, not the Earth Kingdom, not the Fire Nation, not the Water Tribes. We owed allegiance to no one. It's how I like it. So that's also a reference to the bio I have up on screen. Iroh notes that, so you were always traveling. There was no place you called home. But she says home is just another word for being stuck in one place. And he notes that, sometimes putting down roots can allow you more opportunities to like meet people, develop friends, family, that sort of thing. But June just looks to Nyla and says, Nyla's my family. He's all I need. So that's basically it when it comes to June's backstory in this book. You'll note that there's expansion here in that they obviously introduce the mother here, but then it still feels very like incomplete overall. That like, what happened to the mother? Like, did she just die in prison? Like, they don't come back to it. What happened to the father? I assume he just died during the course of their travels. I guess being a bounty hunter is a relatively tough life, always traveling, potentially always being on the run, whatever. But they don't address any of it. So it does feel like they mostly just use what was there on the old Nickelodeon website. But then they don't even use all of it, because you'll note that none of the backstory actually tells us where June and Nyla kind of met. Like, no story about like where the father got the Shearshoe from to give to her, and like the significance of that, because it would have been a cool moment in the comic that I think a lot of people might be expecting from a June focused comic, is the origin of where she got her super unique animal from. It's one of the most distinct parts of the character. But also I would note in all of this that it does feel like a bit of a random backstory drop, because thematically, what is the connection of what we saw from this story here to what happens as we go forward? The book is about the idea of taking like a new step forward, moving on from your old life. And we get that, I suppose, technically with June's father. He used to be a soldier. He made a choice to break June's mother out to start a life again. That was, I guess, June's father's kind of big moment. I think it's told so quickly. Like, this part of the backstory specifically on, like, what's this, page 30? Over the course of, like, it's actually over the course of 2 panels, is really rushed if this is meant to be the big thematic connection. That we just go from literally 2 panels to explain the idea that June's father was one of these soldiers. He knew her well enough to see that what she was doing was ultimately the right thing, and made a decision to break her out, and they then fell in love. Like, massive expansion, I think, needed on that to make it work. It's very rushed and quick, because the mother, you can obviously see the idea of, I guess this is where the more kind of like honorable criminal aspect comes from, I guess, within the family, that she stole from the rich to give to the poor. And then from everything that happened here, this is where the we don't work for the government kind of any nation actually comes from. But there's not the clearest or, I think, cleanest thematic connection of the backstory to what June's arc actually is, because we just leave the backstory here and we never return to it. And 100%, my first time reading through this, even every time I read through it in repeat, I fully expect there to be another bit of backstory that pops up 20 pages from now or something like that, but they just don't. And again, it sort of prompts even more questions than we had before, rather than feeling like we fill in the gaps of June's backstory. It's like this opens up tons more that I'd like to know about, but that we don't get. So, a bit frustrating here. I would really like to know what the writing intent necessarily was, because I feel the book is not like super desperate for page count. I think you absolutely could have cut sections to expand the backstory like quite heavily. Like, I don't think we're just talking about 1 or 2 extra pages. I think you could have easily cut down other parts of this book by like 10 pages to give this backstory a much bigger focus. Because I would say, coming out of this, the decision on what they decide to tell us versus show us in the backstory here feels very confusing. I think you could have easily told us the visual stuff that they show us here about June's mother, but I think you should have shown us times of June when she's younger with her father bounty hunting, and use that to get the characterization kind of across, rather than June just telling us that, like, oh, my father had principles, because it feels like the principles are maybe more of the main kind of big thing overall. There is a slight theme over the course of the book to the idea of like what home is for June, in the idea that she had a home here, but then they had to kind of go on the run constantly and be bounty hunters. But the takeaway that I take from this is that June likes being on the move and doesn't like settling down. That maybe in the future, maybe she can accept that eventually. That's a step she will make in the future. But for now, she still likes moving around the place. That is the takeaway based on the end of the book. So the home aspect, I don't think, is even necessarily what the point is. So I do come out of this just a little bit confused, where like it feels like they knew in this book they had to put backstory in here, but then it felt like they just put some backstory in here instead of the correct thematic backstory in here. But I'd like to know what your guys' thoughts are on this, definitely in the comments. How do you feel about the backstory presented here versus what we already knew about June's backstory? What do you think might have been maybe more effective to link in with what the actual story of the book is? But yeah, we get a bit of a kind of montage here as we arrive eventually after some traveling in Daxia Harbor. This is where we are then introduced to June's kind of bounty hunting friends, her kind of former associates, basically, which is her old bounty hunter friend Fawn and her crew, who are now revealed to basically be farmers, like fruit, vegetables, tea, and they also raise llama pacas, which is our first time, I think, getting to see this animal outside of the reference in the Yang Chen novels that there is a location called Llama Paca's Crossing. So that's a kind of fun detail. But yeah, June is pretty surprised to see this like veteran, like these were bounty hunters through and through, and here they are growing fruit, vegetables, raising animals, and they work on a farm, basically. She's really stunned by this. And so the idea is that June has already now encountered Iroh, who has made a giant change in his life from Fire Nation General to tea shop owner. Now bounty hunters are farmers, and we're going to see with the person, the client who hired her, a change for this character, and it very much prompts her to think about her own future, basically. But that is the idea. They have adapted quite well, this group here, Fawn and her crew, to doing this new way of life. We have called Kinmei, Shu Hui, and Wei, in addition to Fawn. And they all have their kind of nicknames, like Cat Owl Claws, Shifty, and Wicked. So fun details here, but I would say Fawn is the focus. The other three feel like they're just sort of there to be a crew, and they're more kind of gimmicky characters than like properly developed overall. But yeah, Fawn just is basically like, hey, come visit me at my farm, June. You have to see it. Promise me, basically. I'll hate you basically for all time if you don't come to see me. And she just notes that, hey, Iroh, you've got a good idea. You've got a good nose for fine teas, and she seems to find him attractive as well. So that's a fun little detail there. So Iroh leaves this interaction with the bounty hunters kind of noting the same connection I just told you about there. The idea that they've all changed. It reminds me of how I have changed. When I was young and a general in the Fire Nation military, I wanted glory and honor for my country, and I would do anything to get it. But now I see value in life as the owner of a humble tea shop. I see how my work brings joy to my customers and how I gain community by being a part of Ba Sing's say. I've even been seeing a beautiful lady, something I never thought would be possible. There are good things that can come out of being rooted to one place. And he's thinking about he's thinking about his girlfriend, Li Mei here, who if you've read the comic, the free comic book day book short story, Matcha Makers, this is a panel from it where she introduces herself. That comic is, of course, about basically the spirits in Iroh's tea shop forcing him basically to ask her out on a date. And it's obviously revealed here in this comic, some nice continuity, is that they have been seeing each other ever since this. Now, it's unclear how long this has actually gone on, but as we'll see at the end of this comic, there's like a 6-month time skip, so I guess they're still together, so it's a pretty serious relationship, I guess, which is kind of nice to see, which is pretty cool. But just a fun reference that you maybe don't expect a book like this to make, for like the one-shot comic to reference one of the short stories, but they definitely do it. As for where this comic is set in the timeline, I'm guessing it's towards the end of the main kind of comic trilogies. At the very least, by the time skip at the end of the book, I'm guessing we're in or around Imbalance, and this might be set like slightly before then. I don't really think there's any distinct detail that can actually properly fully place it, just because none of the other characters that are involved in those more significant stories are involved here to allow us to place it, but that's just the idea there. At this point, we are introduced to the client who actually hired June to capture Iroh. And it's revealed that it is this character named Kyung. This is a Keung. Apologies if I'm pronouncing that wrong. I'm not really sure what the correct pronunciation is, but Kyung here is one of Iroh's former soldiers under his command, while he was, during the siege of Ba Sing Se, basically. So it sort of sets the stage straight away for like, okay, he's hired a bounty to get his former commanding officer. He's angry about what happened at the siege of Ba Sing Se, but what are the details? That's what we're kind of waiting for. So Iroh is stunned once again to see like his past be brought up once again in front of him, especially with the way Kyung brings it up of like, oh hey, I've heard about your new life in Ba Sing Se. You own a tea shop. Do your customers like know who you really are, General Iroh? Like, he really kind of leans into the idea of like, you hide your past in a way from them, don't you? You've not actually, moved on. But Iroh kind of cuts him off and is like, I don't try to hide my past. I've done my best to live an honorable existence since then, basically. He does show him around that, like, because he's the leader of the Wu Yi cartel, he controls like tea trade, basically. So he has Iroh try some tea, but Iroh's kind of like, hey, can we get down to business? What's this really about? So we get the details on him first of all. So who is Kyung? We find out he's not just a random soldier. He was the leader of a small elite force whose mission was to infiltrate Ba Sing Se just before Iroh broke through the walls of Ba Sing Se. So I guess they had some men on the inside and were more prepared when they did break through. And June highlights, oh, you were a military spy. And so this is why this character was sort of suited to coming out of the war, be someone who had the skills, the covert skills to build up like a cartel in the aftermath of the war. Those skills have allowed him to maintain this kind of business here, because he was all about supplies, undercover work, and that sort of thing. It is revealed here that the other members of his unit died during the siege, of course, and he just highlights that, yeah, we snuck in to do what needed to be done, take out key targets. We did what needed to be done to be victorious. And then we get into the root of his problem with Iroh, which is that he feels Iroh didn't do what needed to be done to be victorious. Basically the idea of, like, effectively, I know your son was killed, but you dropped everything and kind of ran away, you retreated. You didn't stand your ground and get victory when we basically had it. Like, the idea, I believed in you, General Iroh, so much, and then you ruined your reputation in my eyes by doing what you did, and you nearly got me killed, because the reveal that we get here is that Iroh gave the order to retreat after Liu Ten died, but because this unit was behind enemy lines, he kind of knew the message wasn't going to get there, so had to withdraw without them. So Iroh does take responsibility for that message not getting to Kyung and his team. Iroh does explain, like, he addresses, like, the death of Liu Ten. He highlights that, just because we broke through the walls doesn't mean victory was guaranteed. The Earthbenders were still fighting. We were not assured victory. My son was killed, and he lost the will to fight at this point, because he calls it here his father's bloody war. So Azulon's bloody war. That's an interesting detail. We don't really see Iroh talk about his father too much, so interesting. He notes that children of all nations ground beneath the machine of useless conquest. So that's the big takeaway for Iroh. It's like, my own son was killed. That affected me. But it also really highlighted the idea of, like, so many young people dying for a war for the sake of conquest. I can't stick with that anymore, and he had to change. And this was the life-changing event in his life, just told to us here from a different perspective of, like, how one of the men stuck behind enemy lines felt about it, and that, like, he barely got out alive is sort of the idea here. Everyone else died. He was the only one of this elite unit that actually got out. Iroh notes that I could not go on after my son was taken from me. And we get the really kind of devastating line from Kyung here. What about the other soldiers under your command? Weren't we your sons too? And the face Iroh makes on the panel is really strong here. You can tell that this hits him hard, that, in a way, he should have been thinking about the rest of his men in sort of the same way as his son, but he kind of didn't. And he gets down on his knees and is like, I'm sorry, Kyung, I beg for your forgiveness for the loss of your fellow soldiers. If there's anything I can do, please tell me. And Kyung says, there is. You can die. And I really like what they do here, because this is kind of the core of it. It's basically like, kill yourself to make up for this. I think that's what they're kind of alluding to. It's like, not just that, like, I will kill you, but almost a sense of, kill yourself out of dishonor for what happened here. Very Fire Nation. Iroh slowly gets to his feet and just says, no, I refuse. If that terrible war has taught me anything, it's that to continue to take lives, even in the pursuit of honor for my nation, is wrong. I'm an old man, but my life is still worth living. I refuse to give it up to atone for past mistakes. And Kyung just says, how convenient. But I like Iroh's stance there. He is a very kind of agreeable character, I think, in a lot of ways. And so, especially when he's hit with such an emotional statement of, like, you didn't treat the rest of your soldiers in the same way as you treated your son, kind of type thing. He still defends himself on this count of, like, no, I don't believe in, like, more death just to make up for kind of a loss of honor type thing. This is not the correct way to kind of atone for past mistakes, is just to, die. That my big change happened because I saw how many people were dying in the war. So I don't see how another death kind of fixes that, basically. So his plan, as he reveals to June, is that he plans to make him suffer before eventually killing him. June does try to stand up for Iroh a little bit here, which I do appreciate. He's like, he's just a tea shop owner. Your revenge is meant for a man who doesn't exist anymore. So June can see the progress Iroh has made, how different he is, but Kyung gets angry at her and is just like, hey, take your payment and leave. Like, you did your job. I don't need to hear your opinion, basically. She takes it and leaves, but on the panel when she's outside, you can see she's lost in thought about this decision that she has made here. And she's very much thinking about, this might be the last bounty I ever take. I feel really bad about it. Is this how I want to leave it? Especially because, she was getting on quite well with Iroh in the end there. There's a lot for her to think about when it comes to, like, her future. So she gets on Nyla and heads to Fawn's farm to talk things out over there, like she promised. She's introduced to the Llama Pakas, including the matriarch of their herd, who's the Llama Paka called Sweet Dumpling, which is a fun little detail. So over tea, they talk, and June just noticing, it's a nice life you all have here. Fawn asks about Iroh, where is he? And she's like, no, don't ask about him. He seemed like a nice person. And June says, this is interesting. He's not a nice person. He's done terrible things in his past. And we get to the root of it really here with Fawn. And I think this is a really good use of this character, that the four bounty hunter characters that they've properly introduced here, at least they give this, I think, pretty strong character-filled moment to Fawn here, where she points out, like, she laughs, like, funny, I've also done terrible things in my past, taking so many bounties from bad people in my lifetime, clients who I knew were hurting innocent people. Remember what used to be said about me. And June repeats back to her the idea that the way she was always known was, Fawn's so ruthless she'll turn in her own mother for a bounty. And Fawn kind of gives her new take on life here. I like to believe it's possible for people to change, to make amends for what they've done in their past life. But you got to actually want to change. Taking that first step towards a new life, it's the hardest thing I've ever done. So she notes how difficult it was for her to kind of move away from that bounty hunting life and do something different, and to try and make a better life for herself. And I suppose to a certain degree, that's what she's doing, is like by being sort of like a farmer supplying goods to the local community that she cares about in Daxia. That's her way of sort of like giving back and being very opposite of a bounty hunter, kind of cruel bounty hunter. And June has to think about this herself. What is the first step that she is going to make going forward? And she immediately makes it right here at the table. She slams down the bag of money, her payment for the Iroh bounty, and gives it to Fawn, basically. Hey, I'm hiring you one last job to help me break an old man out of Wu Yi cartel's prison. So she brings the band back together, basically, for one last attack here, one last bounty. So Fawn and her crew come back together with June, and they're going to raid Wu Yi cartel to, 1, get Iroh out, 2, get rid of the Wu Yi cartel because they don't like that a cartel runs the city. They don't like the payments that they always ask for. They want them out of the way. And most importantly, they don't think tea should be controlled. The spread of tea, the trade of tea should be controlled by a cartel. So free the tea is the big part of this as well. And we'll get to the kind of resolution on that front as we go forward. So the attack is quite fun. It's not super serious until we get to like the main fight here. The unique gimmick here is that the bounty hunter crew kind of don't have their equipment, I guess, anymore, but they do still have their skills. So they use the tools of their new trade, being farmers basically, to attack. So the guy who raises the llama pakas brings in the llama paka to kick some guards out of the way. They're using their farming equipment instead of like swords and axes and stuff like that to fight, and their skill gets them through all the Wu Yi guards here. June makes her way down to the prison cell, where we see a very beaten up Iroh, but he's still alive. This is where she's confronted by Kyung. So, there's a quick discussion about like, hey, June, does this mean you're considering retirement? Because she says her bounty hunting days are numbered. But Kyung attacks her. Of course, he's a skilled firebender, but June is a very skilled non-bender fighter. She takes him out here initially by just wrapping him up in a scarf and kind of tying him down to the ground to take the key, basically. And the reveal here is that it's going to be sort of tricky for him to get out, because the scarf that she used is with the llama paka wool, which is strong, warm, and also flame resistant. So he'll get out because he's a strong firebender, but it's going to take a little bit of time. So she gets the key, Iroh is out, and then when they get back upstairs, basically, this is where we have the big kind of final confrontation. Kyung confronts June about, like, you've turned your back on your people. Like, why would you... he's trying to kind of call out the idea of, are you not like the Viper Bats now from before? Attacking kind of fellow kind of bounty hunters, kind of criminals in that sort of way. Turning your back on your people. But she's like, no, you're not my people. But he says, I'm what's left of the world you used to be a part of. The few who answer to no one. And like, think about what you're doing right now. You're standing beside a Fire Nation general who would see the end of everything you claim to hold dear. He's everything wrong with this pathetic civilized world. And this is where June finally kind of snaps a little bit and kind of angrily responds, saying that the world is different now. Everything has changed, including the people in it. But I'm starting to see it isn't a bad thing. And she just notes that, like, hey, Iroh is an example. A former Fire Nation general can become a tea shop owner. A spy like you can become the head of a tea cartel, and bounty hunters can find home and family with people that they care about. Everyone is kind of capable of changing and moving away from a kind of darker past, basically, is the takeaway, the idealistic kind of view here at the end. And she just says, like, I won't let you kill Iroh. Turn away from this quest for vengeance or deal with the consequences. And he's going to take the consequences, so there's going to be a fight. Fan throws her kind of a sickle thing here. And there's a quick fight here where we just address the idea of, like, hey, you think being a bender means you're much more powerful than I am, but every non-bender knows when to call on a friend to win a fight. So she just kind of like uses her agility to get behind Iroh, who has kind of preloaded up a big fire attack, and he kind of like uppercuts Kyung into the wall here with a pretty big fire attack that we only get to see from behind a wall, but the fire kind of comes like way up, so it seems like it's a pretty powerful attack here. So Iroh's just like, oh, I needed that to take him out like that. So the place is damaged, but Iroh has an idea. So the resolution to all of this is effectively that, what if we use the structure that the Wu Yu cartel has in place, but turn it from a cartel into a legitimate business, and we'll have Fan and her crew run it. So they will run the legitimate tea trade with fair prices and stuff like that, and it will make like Daxia Harbor into a proper community that's much more respected, so that people don't need to rely on bounty hunting anymore. We can survive the downfall of bounty hunting, basically. So that's the resolution for like Fan and her crew. They're gonna take over the kind of Wu Yu cartel, and I guess turn it into the proper tea trade in the world, which is interesting. We then address Kyung, and he just points out that, hey, why don't you collect the bounty on Kyung? That'll be a large bounty. But she says, no, I'm not a bounty hunter anymore. So she's made her decision here. She needs to take the first step towards a different life. And this is where Iroh gives her the opportunity here. Okay, I'll take the money from the reward money and use it to kind of help the Jasmine Dragon be the best it can be for its customers. And I'll do that by hiring some kind of outside help. And so he offers June a job, and we cut to 6 months later before we find out what it is. So we cut back to the Jasmine Dragon here, and the idea here is that Iroh has a few more different teas on the menu that are quite rare. He points out he has Pearl Oolong from the furthest shores of the Fire Nation, matcha green tea from the Kalau Mountains, and a new blend harvested from a mysterious area the locals call the Swamp, which he says is deliciously swampy. So swamp tea is interesting. This is when June arrives back in, and she sits down with Iroh to have some tea. She shows him what she has acquired, noting that she had to climb a mountain and dodge a leopard caribou for these, and she hopes it's worth it, and it's more rare teas that she's acquired here. She reveals that she has done more traveling and seen more action in 6 months as the Jasmine Dragon's official tea discoverer than she did in 5 years as a bounty hunter. So her new job is as the kind of tea searcher out, or for the Jasmine Dragon. So she basically does bounties, but for specific rare teas, which allows her to live the kind of traveling, exploring life that she likes, but it's honest work, basically. And she has, I guess, technically like 2 kind of home bases. She has the Jasmine Dragon to come back to if she wants to, but she also has like Fan and the crew back at the farm, back at Daxia Harbor as well. And so, you know, she can think about if she ever wants to have a home for the future, because she's still pretty young. She doesn't have to make that decision right now. But that is where we sort of end. That, like she just says, retirement suits me from bounty hunting. I'm glad to hear it, my friend. So June and Iroh are now friends. He has kind of hired her to work for the Jasmine Dragon, but in a role that very much like suits the way that she wants to live. And that's how we wrap things up, which I think is a nice ending. I was a bit worried they were going to tie June too heavily down with Fawn and the others, that she'd just be in Daxia Harbor and we'd like never see her again, basically, because we're not going to reference the comic locations that often. At least here with the connection to Iroh Jasmine Dragon, it gives the opportunity for her to appear in like comics if Iroh appears in them and we need maybe some extra help. It's a nice connection to keep her somewhat local, but she can still turn up in a variety of other locations. So yeah, pretty good ending to the comic overall. I think, like I said at the start, in my general thoughts, the only weakness of the comic, because the present day arc for June is actually pretty good about, you know, making the first step forward to a new life, being able to move on from bounty hunting, and seeing from the older, kind of more experienced characters who've already done it, you can move on from being a Fire Nation general. You can move on from being a bounty hunter. Can I do the same? Yes. The only weakness is the backstory feels very disconnected from the rest of the comic, and especially because they didn't, at least to me, deliver on the parts of the backstory I maybe wanted them to, that I think would have been the most interesting, which is origin of Nyla. I think everyone would have loved to see baby Nyla and her meeting June for the first time. That's just super significant for characters who have those close connections to animals. And then I would say time with young June and her father as bounty hunters to, in a backstory story, get across their view on bounty hunting a little bit better. The focus on sort of what happened to the mother and like how the mother and the father met was like, I can sort of see a few connections, but I don't think it's as obvious or concrete as it probably should be for minor character backstory that we're probably, this is the only book we're ever going to get it from. Feels a little bit, like I said, disconnected is the word that kind of comes to mind here, where I think the book would have worked fine if you didn't touch on any June backstory. Like, I actually don't think you needed to go into it. You could have just maybe had a piece of dialogue or two. You probably had to mention that her father was a bounty hunter, but all the other stuff you maybe didn't need to do. But because you did some of it, it feels like now you need to do quite a bit more of it. Because like I said, it prompts so many other questions about like, hey, when did their mother die? When did their father die? And all these like other things that we didn't actually address. But for what this comic is, a one-shot comic, I think it's pretty nicely done. Obviously, we're going to have the continuous problem with these books of, unless they feel super important, they're always just going to feel like a side story rather than a real main event. But hopefully we can ramp up the publishing properly going forward and get more, you know, strong books, basically. So in the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on the June and Iroh comic, the Bounty Hunter and the Tea Brewer. What do you think about it? What do you think about what I had to say about it? And then remember, there will be a spoiler live stream discussion about this book, and that will be coming up not this weekend, but next weekend. This weekend is going to be the Reckoning of Roku spoiler live stream discussion. But yeah, let me know your thoughts below. But that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.